So with all the things that are going on right now, are we then growing a generation of low conscious leaders?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if we are growing an entire generation of low conscious leaders so much as I think there has been a generation or more of low conscious leaders that, are in power now. But the generation that we're growing, I think, can be quite high conscious. If you think about how many children from a young age nowadays are in therapy, are doing somatic work, are talking
Mm.
about their emotions. Um, I think that it's probably actually the opposite. So it gives me quite a lot of hope.
I create clear thinking and decisive leaders who can amplify their influence. Contact me to find out how I can help you or your organisation. And today our guest is Kelly Campbell. How are you doing, Kelly?
I am doing so well. Really happy to be here with you.
Brilliant. I love the fact that you say so well.
Well, it depends on the day, but today is a so well day.
Excellent. So what make a day a so well day?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I had therapy with my therapist this morning, which
Mm.
always feels good. Woke up feeling really grateful, even though I had a bit of a tough time sleeping because my puppy has epilepsy, and so
Oh,
sometimes she gets quite anxious at night, which makes me anxious and doesn't let me sleep. But I woke up feeling really grateful, even in spite of that lack of sleep. So yeah, I think, for me, it's about the small things as I get older. And yeah, today was a so well day so far.
brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing on that. Um, so tell us a bit more about you.
Well, I am a trauma-informed leadership coach. I've been doing that work for about 6 or 7 years since I sold my digital marketing agency. That agency I started when I was quite young, probably around 22. I had that company for about 14 years, and the real focus of that company was marketing and helping to raise awareness and funds for nonprofits and foundations, and actually a lot of social impact initiatives. So the work was really rewarding. And if I'm being honest, after about 10 or 12 years of doing that, I really had to come to a moment where I had to get honest with myself that I wasn't very happy. I didn't feel very fulfilled, even though the work that we were doing was great. I had wonderful relationships with my employees and clients. There was something about the work that just wasn't doing it for me anymore. And I started down the path of acquisition, getting acquired and selling the company. Was not something that I had planned on doing, but internally it felt like it was pretty necessary. Um, from a personal standpoint, from a health standpoint, and from a marital standpoint. Honestly, all of the parts of my life really were revolving around the agency, and that didn't feel sustainable. So I ended up selling it in 2016 and started out on a very, very different journey. And that journey has led me to what I'm doing today.
And thank you for sharing. I think it's really good when people do share. I'm kind of interested about the idea about trauma-led leadership. Tell me more about that.
Well, I think different than trauma led leadership, it's more about being trauma informed as a leader.
Uh-huh.
And really what that means, because there's a lot of myth around that. A lot of people will say, well, if I'm trauma informed as a leader, that means that people are going to feel like they can come to me and really unburden themselves. And I'm going to have to act the part of a therapist or a counselor. And none of that's true. What trauma informed leadership is really about is understanding what might be happening internally for someone on your leadership team, someone in your employ, one of your clients even, and working with them interacting with them through that lens. So you're being more mindful about how you speak with them. You're asking for consent in certain circumstances. You are leading with compassion because you recognize that the person that's sitting across from you, whether it's in person or on a virtual call, is a human, not just a number in terms of a client or an employee. And so really it's about holding space for people's humanity and making sure that you're being considerate with what you choose to talk about and the words that you choose to use. That's really what trauma-informed leadership is about.
Okay, I'm really pleased you said that, because I was trying to imagine what it could mean, and it felt like it could mean assuming that everything is trauma based, and therefore you need to offer it from that perspective.
No, I mean, there is some truth to the fact that how we all operate and how we show up in our leadership positions or just our employee positions, there's some truth to how we operate is based in the ways in which we've grown up, the stories that we've been led to believe, let's put it that way, the strategies that we've created to make sure that we feel safe and a sense of belonging. How we operate as adults is very much a reflection of some of the trauma that we've encountered, and also, whether that's big T trauma or small T trauma. And I can get into that, differentiation if you like. But so much of our foundations as humans, our composition is very much made up of our experiences. I think we can all pretty much agree on that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that the way that you phrased it, because one of my biggest annoyances is when you have, say, a coach who takes the position that everyone's damaged until they've spoken to them. As if like no one does any kind of stuff beforehand.
Yeah. So what you're referencing is actually one of the things that I talk about in my book. I actually couch that as bypassing. And really even something that's more akin to mental health maintenance versus a trauma integration modality. And the reason why I say that is because the type of coaching that you're talking about is more of a remedial coaching, which is a break fix mentality. A client sitting in front of a remedial coach might think this person is damaged. This person has something that needs to be fixed, and I'm the savior, the one who.
Yes. Such a level of arrogance, I think.
Well, it's arrogance. I'll agree with you there. And it's also a product of the way that they were trained, which is a pretty antiquated understanding of what coaching is. And we've really evolved almost to the exact other side of that in the way that, we coach now, especially as a trauma-informed leadership coach.
That is good to hear.
Yeah. I mean, the stance that I take and how I was trained is that every single client that's in front of me and that I have the privilege of working with is whole and complete, and they are subject matter experts of their own lives. I'm not doing any work with them for them because they're broken or damaged. I'm simply empowering them to come to their own conclusions and holding space for them as they do that. I'm asking pointed questions that maybe challenge them in really loving ways, but it's ultimately about the empowerment piece, because if I'm fixing anything or giving advice, I'm a consultant if I'm sitting in that advice seat, but also it's disempowering if they believe that they need to outsource the solutions to what they might be seeking, right? So yeah, it feels actually a lot cleaner. Maybe I'll use that word. It feels cleaner to be in a relationship where I get to empower other people to come to their own conclusions and really just move forward in, areas of desired change that they want for their lives, because I would never know what they want for their lives. They have to be the experts.
Perfect. So what does trauma mean when we're talking about leadership?
Well, a couple of different things, and we can go in different areas with this, but trauma in terms of its impact on leadership, I see this bifurcation between what I call low conscious leaders and high conscious leaders.
Mm.
Doesn't mean that one is bad and one is good. It basically is a way to differentiate a leader who has done their work, their inner childhood, um, personal development work or not. And so people who have not done that work might be on, across a spectrum of people pleasing, which is not healthy,
Yeah.
or controlling, which is also not healthy or effective.
Mm.
And so the more that you do your own trauma integration work and take responsibility for the traumatic experiences, that you've gone through, the more you kind of come back to this innate way of leading where you really hold everyone's voice as important and valuable. You take responsibility for your side of the street when you make mistakes. You facilitate and foster collaboration and innovation. Those are high conscious leaders. And in my view, there's really not another workaround or another way to get there. Certainly not a quick fix to get there other than doing, your own trauma integration work.
Yeah, I guess if you think of the counselling model, people can't become counsellors until they've been counselled, isn't it? So it's that kind of clearing. So they're not bringing that. So the idea, I guess, is that they're not bringing their own issues into the counselling relationship with a client.
Well, yes. And I mean, I think that that's true. And also you're talking about these counselors as human, right? So they're going to make mistakes. No one's going to get everything perfect. I certainly don't get everything perfect as a trauma-informed leadership coach. And so I think it's more about, yes, having enough under your belt in terms of that trauma integration work, but it's also about really leaning into the self-awareness piece and the ownership of when I do make a mistake, how quickly do I take responsibility for it and clean it up so that, I'm not only cleaning it up for the sake of the relationship, but I'm cleaning it up also as a way to model that for my clients.
Okay. So tell me about the research in your book, Heal to Lead.
Well, there's a lot of different research here. I pull a little bit when I talk about leading with compassion. I pull from Daniel Goleman's work. Sympathy, empathy, emotional intelligence, compassion, what the differences are between, empathy is feeling with, compassion is feeling with, and then taking a supportive action within your capacity. There's some of that. There's also some interesting research that has actually been published for the first time in this book, which is on epigenetics and leadership, which is quite fascinating. That was the work of...
Tell me more about that, because I love epigenetics. So probably for the audience, could you explain what that is and then really do say, how does that work in terms of leadership?
Yeah, so the research here is actually published for the first time in this book. It's the work of the late Dr. Paul Brown, who just passed in January, and Saul Davidson. And these are two colleagues out of London who started working on this concept that, as leaders gain strength and power, some of the ones that are, let's say, the most people controlling, back to what I mentioned before on that spectrum, how you can actually look back into their family of origins and some of the intergenerational trauma that they've experienced, and look at how their particular upbringings, in terms of the trauma that they've experienced, really has set them on a course where it's almost impossible for them to feel empathy with other people, and impossible for them to operate in a conscious way. What we mean by that is that they were flooded, and some of the leaders we're talking about here are Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Putin, there are a number that we talk about in the book, again, with this particular researching family of origin. And, when you have continuous trauma in childhood to the degree that some of these people have, it really floods the body with adrenaline and cortisol. And it doesn't leave room, and it doesn't give them much of what they need in terms of the dopamine and the serotonin to kind of counterbalance that. So it's an actual hormonal imbalance that many of them have. And, it's fascinating because I also love talking about this in particular. And I think it would be an interesting note that in the future, maybe leaders should have some kind of hormonal tests to see if they are so imbalanced to the point where they were flooded with that AC during childhood and they don't actually possess the ability to collaborate well and to feel empathy and to make decisions on behalf of the whole, the good of the whole, then maybe they're not fit to be leaders, right? If it's an actual hormonal issue. That's a whole nother podcast, probably, Judith. But I do find this conversation and this particular research very fascinating. And I'm hoping that more and more people will start to look into this because there's something here.
Thank you for that. So my understanding is with epigenetics is that the environment that you're in determines which genes get switched on.
Yes.
So you're saying then that because of this kind of trauma-based childhood that these leaders have had, that has switched on damaged genes, as it were.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. And so the way that they say it is that, if it leads the genetic structure to produce only adrenaline and cortisol, the implication is that some leaders could be sort of locked into operating unconsciously from this place of threat perception, right? So they're kind of on the defensive without knowing that they're on the defensive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But that is fixable, isn't it? It's not that once you've had that, that's it. I mean, you can do the work to resolve some of that.
Well, you can do the work. It would be quite extensive and you would have to be willing to do the work. And so I think we see some of the leaders that we're talking about, certainly not willing to do the work.
There's no incentive, shall we say?
There's no incentive because there's a lot of, to the point where some of these leaders are so-called leaders, there is a lot of praise for the way that they're operating. And so why would they change that?
Let's listen to a quick advert.
The Maverick Paradox. Judith Germain is an author, speaker, consultant, mentor, and trainer, and the leading authority on Maverick leadership. She is the founder of the Maverick Paradox, which supports organizations to enhance their leadership capabilities and to help business owners develop and grow their businesses. Judith enables individuals, business owners, and organizations to improve their impact and influence. She is also HR Zone's leadership columnist, and her expert opinion has appeared in national, international, and trade press.
Welcome back to the Maverick Paradox. This is the podcast for the pathologically curious. So with all the things that are going on right now, are we then growing a generation of low conscious leaders?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know if we are growing an entire generation of low conscious leaders so much as I think there has been a generation or more of low conscious leaders that, are in power now. But the generation that we're growing, I think, can be quite high conscious. If you think about how many children from a young age nowadays are in therapy, are doing somatic work, are talking about their emotions. I think that it's probably actually the opposite. So it gives me quite a lot of hope. It's just that some of the leaders that we're dealing with today that are in power, whether that be in corporate America or politics globally, it's part of that antiquated, we don't care about feelings,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
we're here to do work and that's it. I think that there's a huge shift. I mean, I don't think anyone can deny that, but we're really in the throes of it, especially here in the US.
Yeah. Because I remember talking to somebody and saying something fairly similar about, how much hope there is for the younger generation because they're more inclusive and they're more this and they're more that. And then the person I spoke to said, "You're saying that because you're in London. But if you come outside of London and you live where I live, you'll find the complete opposite." Which I was quite shocked at because I thought, gosh, I must be in a bubble. Because like everywhere that you see, whether it's in this country or next, there's all this talk about this consciousness that you're saying. And yet there's somebody that's saying, yeah, it is in these type of areas, but it's not everywhere. And in fact, there's such a lurch to the opposite that it's quite concerning.
Well,
And
I guess,
go on.
yeah, maybe it depends on the lens through which you're looking.
Mm,
And also, like this person said, where you live, right? I
mm,
mean, I live in New York. You live in London. Maybe those are, slight bubbles because they are, it's just more diverse, more equitable.
mm,
It's not perfect by any means in either of the places that we live, by any means. But yeah, maybe that is the case. I don't know. From what I see in the lens that I look through, which is much broader, I'm hope to be not so much of a narrow-sighted person, but really looking at collectively what is the
yeah, yeah. I
and
guess what I was thinking as well is that we know that the Holocaust um, made a big difference for generations. The
mm,
trauma just travelled down through generations, and we know that slavery has transferred, and the trauma from that has transferred through generations, and we're still feeling the curse of that through health and other reasons. And I'm just sort of thinking with more recent things like with COVID and cost of living risings and stuff like that, I'm just wondering whether we are switching on some of those cortisol genes with maybe not Generation Z, but maybe Generation Alpha. Do you know, in the next
yeah.
generation afterwards, because they're kind of growing up in quite a high level of trauma.
Yeah, I think that where I'm talking about the hope coming in is that even if that's true, and I do think that there's some truth to what you're saying for sure, I think that there's more dialogue around this is how I'm feeling. Where could this
Yes,
be
that's very
coming
true.
from? Right. And so I don't know. I mean, in the previous examples that you're giving, I just don't think that there was any dialogue. There have been a lot of people who said, why is there so much more trauma now than there ever has been in all of history? And the answer is it's not that there's more, it's that people are talking about it. You could say the same thing for the conversation around, why are there more LGBTQ plus people? There aren't more. We're just feeling more comfortable to come out now. So, again, all of this is about more conversations, less stigma, more vulnerability, more inclusion, and that's going to rile some people up.
Yeah.
So, again, depends on the lens where you live, the lens through which you're looking at it. And if you're actually looking at more of this from through a collective lens or collective energy, if you will. Because for me, that feels really true in my body. And also, if it didn't, what hope would I have?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think it's just a case of recognizing that in some respects we're in a less traumatic time than ever before. If we really looked at history and said, yes, we're going through trauma driven times, but actually it has been a lot worse.
Again, it depends on who you talk to. If you're having that conversation with someone in Gaza right now, they would not agree with that, right?
Well, that's true. Yeah,
So
good point.
it's all context. It's all context and location and experience. And that's kind of the beauty of all of this, is that we all have different experiences. And again, what gives me hope is that we're talking about it, and we're talking about what's happening, not just in our own little, sort of bubbles here, but we're talking about what's happening in multiple different places, and talking about how that makes us feel and what other people's experiences might look like. And again, that brings the empathy on. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree that I have less hope for future generations, or that we're breeding a generation of low conscious leaders or low conscious people. I have quite a lot of hope, actually.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is all for nothing, I guess. Maybe I'll put it that way. I don't think that this is all for nothing. I think there's a reason.
As long as we don't recreate Skynet, then we'll be all right. Then we'll be all right.
Yeah.
I think I do agree with you, because one of the things I talk about a lot is leadership is personal. Like, we bring our own person to it, and the people we are in front of, what we do with them is personal too. And I guess what you're saying with this trauma-informed leadership is recognize the humanity of the individual and adjust to that humanity, and not try to dominate from your perspective on everything.
Yeah. Which is really funny to me, Judith, that we have to have a name for that. It feels like how we should just all be operating, right? And I hear that sounds kind of utopian, but the point is that we've just forgotten this is actually how we're built, right? If we never had the layers and the complexities and the other people's stories and what we make them mean about us, if we never had all of those layers sort of thrust upon us when we were younger, we would just know how to do this. And so I often think about this as like a remembering or a return to innate leadership. Thinking about how you might impact someone else in a moment is a very human thing. It's really when we have care online, right? If we return back to, okay, well, this, whatever the situation is, it's not just for me or about me, or even just me and one other person. It's like, well, how do we look at what we're doing, what we're saying, the actions we're taking or not taking, how that's impacting us on a communal level, whatever size and scope that community looks like. That's actually what we were built for. We know that we die alone. We thrive in connection. And so caring for our community, whatever that community looks like, an organization, a country, a family, that all feels very sort of normal and human to me. And so, yeah, again, this idea that we have to have a name for this, I call it trauma-informed leadership, or, trauma-informed care. But it's really like, at the end of the day, how do we remember how to be human again?
Yeah, we've become too adept at stripping humanity from people we don't like.
Yeah, because it's easy to other. It's very easy to other. The more that we... Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, it just reminded me of a talk I did a few months ago, where the talk basically was around the idea of whose lived experiences is more important. Because it's like, who gets to say which one has dominance in which situation? And I think as leaders, that's something we really need to be wary of, that we don't assume that our lived experience is the lens that everything needs to be viewed in.
Yeah, I mean, that is pretty much the premise of a supremacist culture or society, right? It's like a singular, homogenous lens. Yeah, I think that back to this, sort of the concept of othering and its prevalence. I think it's because we've gotten so disconnected from each other, from nature, from the plants, the animals, all of that. We are so connected, interconnected. And there's just so much, as intelligent as we humans are, we have created conditions, environments, technologies, all of these things that really have disconnected us from each other. And that feeling of, some people in a spiritual community might call it oneness, but I just think of it like interconnection. How I feel, what I do, when I look at someone on the street who's maybe, didn't have as privileged of a life as I did and is really suffering. I'm no different than that person. The conditions in my life could have ended up very easily in the same way that theirs did. So, of course I want to reach out and help them and, give them some water or food or something. And I just think that there are a lot of people who forget, it's so easy to other and say, oh, I will never be that way, or I'm disconnected from that. That's not like me. But if we just change that to just like me, I think,
I think you're right. I think I was just thinking we almost need Mark Twain to come back and write another book. Because it's that kind of like, we reached a point, and it was, driven by the politics and the world leaders, from looking at poverty and things such as that and going, this environment has created this situation. This is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And we've changed that to, you have done some morally corrupt thing, so it's your own fault why you're in this situation. So we've taken it away from society needs to get together and fix this because it's essentially wrong, to, I don't really care what happens to you because you've done something wrong. There must have been something wrong with you. It's almost like a moral deficit. And people, you know what I mean? Rather than reaching out to help, it's like, well, you got yourself in that place, you get yourself out.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's also when it's, I need to get mine before someone else gets theirs or gets me. Right.
Yeah.
If someone has found themselves in a position where they're struggling and suffering, again, the most humane thing that we can do is to reach out and help them, because they are also part of us. They are also part of our community, our family. And we've gotten so far away from that. I do also have a lot of hope because I see many people returning to, I guess I'll call it a simpler way of life. People who are opting out left and right of, the status quo and the living in cities and having jobs where they're working 16 hours a day and, all of these things. I see a lot of people really starting to take it seriously, where they want to know what it's like to grow their own food and, care for other people or other beings. I get that society isn't really built, our current society isn't really built for those people, but I don't know, it feels like there is definitely part of that collective shift that we're feeling is a little bit more of that return to that simpler way. And that doesn't mean that business goes away, and that doesn't mean that technology even goes away, but it certainly needs to be used for more productive endeavors.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious, that I'm just wondering, I suppose, that with people now opting out their goodwill with organisations, so, the generations, that generational thing about, working really long hours for nothing because your company needs you, to, I'll work my hours, and then the hours I have left, that which used to be goodwill, is going to go to my side hustle.
Right.
It makes me wonder whether organisations really survive on the goodwill of their employees, and I wonder whether we'll get to the point where we'll go back to having two people, because realistically you need two people because of the hours, but you used to get by with one because that one person would work 10 hours, 11 hours, 12 hours. And maybe they'll just say, I'll do 6, thanks, because that's what you're hiring me for. I've got 6 hours to put in my business, and your companies will end up hiring 2 people.
Yeah. I mean, maybe. I think we have to really figure out the future of work. It's really not, I mean, I just saw an article a little bit earlier in the Harvard Business Review about this. And we just haven't figured it out. People are still talking about return to office and COVID. And, it's like, we are a very intelligent, advanced species. We should be able to figure this out. And really what it is it's money has become sort of that, I don't know, sort of the baton in the turnstile or something. That's the thing that's keeping us from, again, exploring that humanity. What do people actually need? Do we need these big offices? Could we do something more productive with these things?
I want a Star Trek world where on Earth there's no poverty. People work because they want to do a thing. Everyone is treated equally. I want that utopia. I want Starfleet.
You brought that around so beautifully from the beginning of the conversation. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's possible. I don't think it's possible in my lifetime, but
No.
it feels important to be part of the contribution team to get there.
Cool. Before we end, I think it would be remiss not to ponder a bit on how can someone become a trauma-informed leader? How do you become one?
Well, trauma-informed leaders go through some type of training so that they understand what it means to be trauma-informed, which means that they're getting a background on, what trauma looks like, how it presents, how it's categorized, what it might look like when someone is in various states of nervous system dysregulation so that they can recognize it. So that's number one. So it's a training. And then it's about practicing and modeling that same behavior with the rest of their leadership team. Obviously, the entire leadership team ideally would be trained as trauma-informed. And, these trainings are available now. When I was getting trained as a trauma-informed leadership coach, I think there were probably only 200 people globally who were certified as trauma-informed coaches. That number is vastly different now. There are lots and lots of organizations that offer trauma-informed leadership training. And, I work with a lot of leaders as a trauma-informed leadership coach that not only am I coaching them, but they're also getting the benefit of seeing what it means to be a trauma-informed leader and a highly conscious leader. So, whether someone goes through a training and then works with a coach or goes through a training and then, has some accountability for the rest of their leadership team, that's what that is. And then it's a practice, right? Because being trauma-informed isn't really something that you put on just your LinkedIn profile, right? This is about a way of being. It is a, dare I say, lifestyle. It's everything that I experience and everything that I engage in my life, I choose that to be trauma-informed. So, for example, I have a trauma-informed therapist that I work with for my mental health. When it comes to my physical health, I have a trauma-informed doctor, trauma-informed practitioner, medical practitioner. So, being trauma-informed in terms of its origins, it's been around. This is not new. It's been around for a very long time in the healthcare sector. I haven't necessarily seen that in my experiences in the healthcare sector until now, but I think it's becoming more and more necessary, demanded even, because the way that we've been operating, whether it's in the healthcare system or the leadership realm, has really not been working, if we're being honest. So getting back to being a little bit more human seems like a really good option.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed having you on the show.
Oh, thank you. The pleasure's been mine.
You're welcome. And thank you out there for tuning in to the Maverick Paradox podcast. I'm Judith Germain, your host, and I hope you've enjoyed today's conversation.
The Maverick Paradox Magazine. The Maverick Paradox Magazine is for the pathologically curious. Written by a swagger of socialized mavericks who are divergent thinkers, the magazine tackles the biggest issues affecting maverick leaders today. You might be a business owner or a leader within an organization who wants to have your thinking challenged, to be exposed to a diversity of thought, or to learn from diverse experts in their fields. If so, the Maverick Paradox magazine is for you. Join the swagger at themaverickparadox.com and engage in the conversation.